And that is that stealing is far more common than we think. We live in a world full of cheats. And we might think of theft and stealing as maybe something abstract, something out there. But if we think on this, and as you reflect on your own experience, as I reflect on my own experience, ask the question, have you ever stolen anything? Again, I reflect on my life, and I can look back and, yeah, I can remember when I was but a wee lad, I stole candy from a grocery store. Candy my parents probably would have purchased if I'd asked them, but I didn't. And then there were those erasers from the student store at elementary school. Erasers I didn't even need, but I pocketed them and walked out without paying. And I'm part of that generation that, I've downloaded music illegally from LimeWire. I'm a thief. The law, as we've been seeing, condemns me. But I'm pretty sure as I look around this room, I'm not alone in this. I think I'm sitting in an auditorium full of thieves. The eighth commandment, you shall not steal. It certainly addresses the petty theft, taking candy, erasers, downloading music illegally, and all that. It addresses the pickpockets and the bank robbers. But it's not just about those things. The eighth commandment is about respecting the rights of others. It's about recognizing that everything we own is ultimately a gift from God. And it is about refusing to take what isn't ours. Stealing undermines trust, it destroys relationships, it dishonors God. You see, in the eighth commandment, God is calling His people to respect what belongs to others. This is a commandment which protects personal property. The eighth commandment is where God is calling His people to honor His wise arrangement of things. As we look at this, it's a very brief statement. 4 words in English, you shall not steal. Stealing is taking without the owner's permission, taking something without the owner's permission. For example, if I were to ask any one of you, if I were to ask Bob, hey Bob, can I borrow your car? And he said, yes. Well, then I have his permission to borrow his car. But if he says no, or if I just go and take his car without asking permission, that's stealing. I have stolen his vehicle. This applies to both private as well as public theft. Also, if I destroy someone's property, I'm on the hook for restitution. When the law, God is continuing His exposition of the law and expanding upon it. In Exodus 22 and verse 1, says, if a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it, or steals it, he shall, or sells it, I should say, he shall repay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. Verses 5 and 6 of the same chapter, if a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed over, or lets his beast loose, and it feeds in another man's field, he shall make restitution from the best of his own field and in his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns so that the stacked grain or the standing grain or the field is consumed, he who started the fire shall make restitution. Destruction of property is under this. It is a form of theft, and therefore you need to make restitution. You need to make it right. As we've been seeing, most of these commandments are stated in the negative. You shall not. That's true for the eighth commandment. You shall not steal. If we reworded this positively, if we were to state this commandment positively, it might say something like, you shall respect the property the Lord your God gives to you and to others, to your neighbor. This commandment is about respecting the stuff God gives to you and that He gives to others. It centers on rightful ownership of private property. Each person has their own personal property. They have their own stuff, in other words. And this commandment sets a perimeter around your stuff and my stuff. That perimeter is intended to make it so that I don't take what belongs to you without your consent, and you don't take what belongs to me without my consent. This commandment shows that there is no such thing as a universal community of goods where nobody owns anything. Sorry, Star Trek, okay? Or even the World Economic Forum in a more tangible way today. You may have seen a video they produced some years ago where they said by 2030, you will own nothing and you'll be happy. That is simply ungodly. It's demonic. No, you own stuff because God has seen to it that you have it. He's given it to you in His wise arrangement of things. And since God has given me my stuff and He's given me your stuff, He's given you your stuff, it would be wrong for me to take what belongs to you or for you to take what belongs to me. And we're already starting to see the seriousness of violating this commandment as we think about how God has providentially arranged everything, that God has seen to it that everything that I own and everything that you own, you have because He gives it to you. So when we break the eighth commandment, we actually dishonor God's providential arrangement of everything. You have what you have because God has seen to it that you have it. Not that the state has seen to it that you have it, but that God, as the sovereign ruler of everything, has given it to you. Also, your neighbor has what they have because God has seen to it that they have it. God gives each person what they have. But when you steal, you're dishonoring God. You're dishonoring His wise arrangement of things. You are defying divine providence, and you are rebelling against the Almighty God. That's part of the seriousness of this. One writer put it this way: God's providence distributes possessions among men, and to steal another's property is just as if we ourselves invaded the very rule of God. Would we think that we can take God's place and redistribute His gifts as we deem fit? Perish the thought. Nothing would embody the opposite of Christ more than such a stance and such a position. Especially when we remember that Christ, at one point during His life, was made an offer by the devil himself. Bow down and worship me. You remember during the temptation of Christ, it's recorded in Matthew chapter 4, Luke chapter 4. Bow down before me, says the devil to Christ, and I will give you all of the kingdoms of the world. Accepting such an offer would have been robbing God, and Christ would have been robbing Himself in a couple of different ways. He would have robbed Himself of the joy set before Him of going to the cross so that He might redeem His people. And it would have robbed God, Christ would have robbed God, of the privilege of having His Son sit at His right hand. It would have robbed Christ of the glory that was His before the foundation of the world. And quite frankly, such an act would have been the undoing of the Trinity. Again, perish the thought. This is, again, the seriousness of breaking the eighth commandment. And hopefully you're already seeing that this commandment is applicable to us in so many different ways. First, you see that all theft is wrong. Do not steal, that would mean all theft is wrong. This would include private theft. This is what happens when someone picks another person's pocket, for instance. Shoplifting, burglary, breaking into another person's house and stealing away their goods. All of this is private theft. It is condemned by this commandment. Also public theft. Things like carjacking, insider trading, tax evasion. These are forms of public theft, and these are condemned by this commandment. Domestic theft, where one spouse takes away the money or goods of the other spouse, of their spouse. Like when maybe a husband who has a particular habit wastes an exorbitant amount of money on that particular habit, or when a wife squanders money away on frivolous things. This is a form of domestic theft. When children rob from their parents. I even think of when, we know the reality of when individuals get a divorce, and when a divorce turns especially nasty, where one party is now trying to fleece the other person. This is domestic theft. This is condemned by this commandment. Ecclesiastical theft, where someone robs from a church. We've probably heard news stories in recent years about a particular church that they were taking the Sunday collection to the bank, and an individual robs the person who was taking that collection to the bank. That's a form of theft, ecclesiastical theft, stealing from the church, which, by the way, is robbing God, because those who give during the contribution, you're giving in order to give that to God. It's a very serious offense. All theft is wrong. I want to expand this just a bit further to a couple of other areas that maybe we don't think about when it comes to theft. Scripture talks about, my English Standard uses the word enslavers. The old King James used the word man-stealers. And this is what we today call human trafficking, and the Bible does address this. In Exodus 21 and verse 16, Exodus 21, verse 16. The Bible says, "Whoever steals a man and sells him, and anyone found in possession of him, shall be put to death." The death penalty was punishment for kidnapping and unlawful imprisonment. And I believe that shows us what a grievous evil this is in the sight of God. That phrase in there, anyone found in possession of him. That shows if you are aiding and abetting the man-stealer, you're just as liable of the penalty and punishment of the man-stealing, of the enslaving. There are many application points that could be brought to bear on this subject of human trafficking. But I want to think about this in relation to the present crisis at our southern border. You have men, women, and children who are charged an exorbitant amount of money in order to coyotes. These are the individuals who are tasked with getting them across the border. That's a form of extortion, by the way. The coyote is stealing from the family by overcharging them so much money. Thousands of dollars are usually paid in order to accomplish this task. That is further compounded by the fact that often the women and the children are trafficked into sex slavery, which that subject itself, it comes underneath the human trafficking issue that we're talking about. And it doesn't just take place at the southern border. It takes place all over the world. I received an email some months ago about what's going on in Uganda with this particular, with the sex slavery trade there. But it takes place right in our own backyard. Right here in Modesto, that happens also. I still believe the death penalty, that should be applied to these man-stealers who are engaged in this. You want to disagree with me about that? We can discuss that. But the reality is, because of what they are doing in stealing a person's life away from them, their life is made forfeit. But back to what I was discussing about our southern border in particular. Remediation of this problem, I believe, comes through a few different avenues. Number one, I do believe we need to crack down on these enslavers, these man-stealers. And it can't just be a slap on the wrist. Because of what they are engaged in, especially the sex trafficking component of this, which is the reality, we need to crack down on these enslavers, these man-stealers. This is why God puts into place governing authorities. Governing authorities bear the sword, and they ought not bear that in vain. Second, I believe we need to encourage people from these countries who are seeking to improve their station in life to pursue entrance into our country via legal avenues. It's been over a decade now, but Kim and I went on a short-term mission trip to Guatemala. Guatemala is en route that many of the individuals from Central South America, they take on their way to our southern border. And at the time, it was the Obama administration, and it was a crisis then. So that shows you it doesn't matter if it's an R or a D in the office, it's a crisis. But I asked the missionaries there, I asked the local leaders, what do you do if you come across an individual who is on their way, making their way to the southern border of America in order to enter into the country illegally? What do you say to them? I was genuinely interested in what their answer was going to be. And what they said was, we tell these individuals, you need to go back home and do things the right way, especially if they're Christians. And that stuck with me ever since. Now, of course, there are usually complaints about, well, it takes a long time and it takes a lot of money and that sort of thing. I hear you. That leads me to the third point. We need to address our immigration policies to see how to improve areas which need improvement. I don't claim that it's not a perfect system right now. This side of eternity, there may never be a perfect system. And so it does seem right, yeah, we can examine areas where we can improve. I will say this, that if you compare our immigration policy with another country, say France, it's right on par. It's right about the same amount of time, roughly the same amount of money if you wanted to transfer and become a citizen of the nation of France. I believe the country that has the easiest immigration entrance is Australia. But who wants to go there, right? Just kidding. Aussie, Aussie, Aussie to all the Australians who may be watching, okay? Without solutions like this, a system which A system which violates the eighth commandment in a variety of ways is perpetuated. And yeah, I do believe "you shall not steal" certainly applies to the man stealing that takes place through human trafficking. By the way, do you know the number one human trafficking event in the world? It takes place in our country. You know when it is? Super Bowl. That's right. You know, people talk about if God doesn't bring judgment upon America, he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology. When it comes to human trafficking, there's a point there as well. Let's consider this commandment in relation to another area of life. And I want to read several passages to introduce this one. If you come to Leviticus chapter 19, Leviticus 19, verse 11, we'll start there. Leviticus 19:11, "You shall not steal, you shall not deal falsely, you shall not lie to one another." Now come with me to verses 35 and 36. Same chapter, Leviticus 19, 35, 36. "You shall do no wrong in judgment, in measures of length or weight or quantity. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah and a just hin. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Now come with me to the book of Proverbs, chapter 20. Proverbs 20, and I want us to notice verse 10. Proverbs 20, verse 10, "Unequal weights and unequal measures are both alike an abomination to Yahweh." Same chapter, verse 23. Proverbs 20, verse 23. "Unequal weights are an abomination to Yahweh, and false scales are not good." This is just a sampling of a number of different verses that speak to this issue of, we'll call it economic justice, economic fairness. And it really has to do with just being honest in your business transactions. You'll notice that the Lord connected this in the Leviticus 19:36 passage to the fact that I brought you out of Egypt. He connects it to their redemption. Unequal weights, unequal scales is dishonesty. It is theft. And what God desires is fairness, honesty, and integrity in our business practices. Unequal scales, dishonest measurements, these are ways to cheat someone out of goods and out of their money. Such corruption and exploitation can take many different forms. I just want to address a few of these. First is by taking advantage of a person's need. Taking advantage of a person, they really need this particular thing. And sometimes it might manifest with supply and demand. Maybe the supply is low, and so the demand is high, and what happens is the prices go up. Sometimes there may be an ample supply, but the seller jacks up the price because the demand is so high, or someone needs it. You know, for me, things always come back to the Twilight Zone. There's an episode, it's called the Rip Van Winkle Caper, where these guys, they rob a bank, so already they're violating the eighth commandment. But then, you know, here we are in the Twilight Zone, they are able to put themselves in suspended animation for 100 years, and once the 100 years are over, the heat will die off, and they'll come out, and then they can spend their ill-gotten gains in a variety of different ways. They robbed a bank of gold. They had a bunch of gold. What happens is they're way out in the desert. Their car, they crash because now they start turning on each other. That's the way these capers go. And at one point, there's just two of them left. And since they're out in the desert, they've only got one canteen of water between the two of them. And the guy starts selling off drinks for gold bars to his partner, until eventually he gets to 1 gold bar for 1 swallow. Now, again, it's Twilight Zone, it's fiction and all that. But again, that's the idea of the demand is high. Oh, you want what I've got? It's going to cost you. Dishonest scales, unequal measures. Another instance in way this corruption and exploitation shows up is through haggling. There's a text in the book of Proverbs, still same chapter, Proverbs 20, verse 14. Proverbs 20, verse 14. Listen to this one, right? Bad, bad, says the buyer, but when he goes away, then he boasts. You get the picture? Here's the buyer, and he's looking at the merchandise going, no, what are you even selling, right? What is this? This is terrible. Bad, bad, says the buyer. Because he's trying to bring the price down. He's trying to get the best price he can get, even though it may hurt the seller. Bad, bad. And then once he makes the purchase, he goes away and he boasts, boy, look at, I got a great deal on this. Now, this has the buyer in mind, but it could be the seller, right? Maybe the seller exaggerates the quality of his product, even though he knows, right? This happens when you go and you buy a car and you buy a lemon, right? This thing's a lemon, right? Boy, that car salesman saw you coming, right? What do I got to do to get you into this thing, right? He's taking advantage. That's the upsale. Even though they may know, right? Okay, so not everything's Twilight Zone. Sometimes it's Andy Griffith. Remember the episode where Barney got a great deal on a car? A little old lady sold him her car. And man, I only drove it to church on Sunday. He's like, oh, come on, Ange, it's a great car. And he drives it around, and then all of a sudden it starts clunking and all this thing. And turns out that little old lady, she was all shifty and everything and really took Barney for a ride there, right? And had put I forget, was sawdust in the gas tank, right? Yeah. You know what I'm talking about. That's theft. Right? That's the kind of haggling and over-exaggerating the quality of the car and all that. One more way is taking advantage of a person's ignorance of what they have. Maybe the buyer knows the product, right? And really knows, that's something of high value. The seller has no idea. Oh, well, I could just take this off your hands, right? Yeah, that's another form of theft. I hope you see, with all these various examples, God's law follows us wherever we go. Whether we're at home, at work, at church, in the store, wherever. Years ago, a small-town preacher told the story of a man in his church who'd become a Christian. For years, he'd run a hardware store, and one Sunday, this man came forward during the invitation. He was in tears. He confessed that for years, running that hardware store, he had shortchanged customers by a few cents here and there. But after meeting Jesus, he began quietly to go back customer by customer, repaying what he had taken, even when the customers hadn't even noticed. Now, when this happened, some people kind of laughed it off. It's not that big a deal. Others, though, were deeply moved by what this now Christian man had done. But all could see that Christ had made a difference in his life. Christ had made him new, had transformed his relationship to the law so that he saw, he had a Zacchaeus moment. If I have cheated anyone, I'll repay it fourfold. And I believe this is illustrative of the transformation of our relationship to the law once we become a Christian. It shows the power of the eighth commandment when it's written on our hearts. God calls us, again, not just to avoid stealing, but to live in such a way that we respect other people's properties. We respect they're made in God's image. And we don't want to do anything that would dishonor God or His image. To steal, that's to distrust God's provision. But to live honestly is to say, the Lord is my provider, I will walk in integrity. And of course, one more thing. The law, as we've been saying all this time, it is our guardian. It takes us by the hand and it leads us to Christ. As you consider and reflect on your own life and you think about those ways that you've stolen, maybe in ways today you hadn't thought about. The gospel speaks a better word to our hearts when it condemns us. The blood of Jesus is what washes away all of our theft, all of our violations of the law of God. And again, now we live in that new relationship, that transformed relationship to the law. And so, the final exhortation is, let us return what is not ours. Let us repay what we owe. Let us resist the temptation to take what is not ours. And let's even go a step further and practice generosity. Let the one who stole steal no longer, Paul says in Ephesians 4. But rather, let him work with his hands so that he might have something to share with others. When we give instead of take, we show the difference the gospel has made in our heart. We reflect God's generosity. How was God generous to us? He did not withhold His own